If there was a computer that took over the whole world, could you have empathy for it and like think of it as like an ancestor or something like that? People have different feelings about that. I think the human extinction is a bad thing. Maybe I should put
Sure.
that's my flag. Human extinction
I
is
was
a bad
gonna
thing.
ask about that, but yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, yeah.
Whether you see AI as an amazing new technology or a dangerous alien mind, the impact it will have on society is hard to deny. Should AI be carefully regulated, outright banned, or should we leave the free market to run its natural course? These are important questions to get right. But with societal relevance comes political argument, and the debates around AI increasingly provide more heat than light. I met Chad Stearns, my guest today, on the PauseAI Discord server, which contains a dedicated channel for people who wish to express disagreement with the organization. Chad stood out as being especially willing to engage in civil, reasoned debate. In this conversation, this video being the first in a series, I hope to build a bridge of understanding between views on AI that, at least on the surface, seem as different as they could be.
My name's Chad. I'm a programmer. Been programming for about 10 years now. Went to school for economics, so it's kind of like a different kind of thing from what I end up doing for work. I actually work at an AI company now, not doing research or anything. We mostly use like ChatGPT and things like that, like a lot of other AI startups. I kind of jumped into it recently with all the excitement going on with AI development.
What got you interested in AI to begin with?
But I found my current company mostly through connections and interest. It does seem like there's a lot of really great AI stuff going on right now. A lot of big things to develop. I'm just following AI developments on Twitter, like so many other people.
What is the day-to-day work like for someone who's building AI?
There's all these new like LLM products out there. It's mostly finding use cases for them and then making processes that integrate these. We've got a product we're trying to find customers for. You talk to it like any other chat AI, but it goes through several steps of using LLMs to try to analyze how it's going to respond. I've seen other startups that have the same kind of structure, I guess, but I think that's sort of a normal flow.
So you take something like GPT-4, ChatGPT or something like that. Someone can just use that as a chatbot, but if you want to actually like use it in a product, you need other stuff to go around it. And then you build those things like to make it more useful, but you're using someone else's AI as like a base.
Yeah, basically, I think that captures it well. It's kind of like these big companies just made these things and they just sort of unleashed, and you could buy, access like uncapped usage for ChatGPT, like me and a lot of other people do. But it sort of feels like people are just figuring out how to get productive uses out of them. Startups like mine are actually putting them together like building blocks to try to get something out of it.
It's interesting seeing the business model that the AI companies are taking, like OpenAI and probably Anthropic as well, seem to be the approach of we're going to build this really general purpose AI, and then other people will make useful products with it, and then we'll license them. And so, like, the businesses are paying us money so that they can use our thing. Other companies like Meta might be more, we really want AI to power our search algorithms, and we're going to build that so we can use it for this thing. So it actually kind of makes sense for them to be open source and others not to be.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
So yeah, the reason I contacted you for this is you're in a kind of interesting position of being on both the Pause AI and the Effective Accelerationists servers. For those in watching this who doesn't know what those are, these are like someone being a Republican and a Democrat at the same time. Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, where Pause AI, which is what I'm involved in, is all about trying to stop frontier development, slow things down so that society, regulation, all these kind of things should catch up. Whereas Effective Accelerationist is very much against that. Although I don't think I should be the one characterizing what EAC is. So why don't you go ahead and saying what EAC or Effective Accelerationist is all about?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting question. I don't know if I could be like the spokesperson from it because I sort of jumped into it, got curious about it, feeling like this could be my thing. But since I've jumped in, I've met a lot of people with it. And, you know, I don't
Honestly,
know.
I think that's more interesting because, like, if I was talking to a spokesman, I would be getting a very PR sanitized kind of thing. And I think it's be more real and more interesting to see, like, what is it from someone who's on the ground and, like, actually participating.
Sure. Yeah. I first saw the term on Twitter and just for information, like I'm pretty libertarian in how I feel about things. And I think I saw some tweets. I think I saw Mark Andreessen, who's a tech entrepreneur, and he had some kind of manifesto. And I realized, like, reading through this, I happen to agree with like everything in this manifesto. Is this something for me? So I started just following more acceleration stuff. And I think I realized I was really the first thing that really confused me was I was talking to somebody and I was trying to say like, no, it's not about inventing artificial superintelligence. It's about free marketing stuff. Like let's unleash technology. It'll be great for humanity, things like that. And then they corrected me. And then I talked to more and I realized like they were right. Like I was wrong and they were right. Since then, I've talked to more people and like, yeah, more of them are kind of like this. Like they're really excited about create like birthing, I don't know, a new kind of entity, a new species or something like that. I don't know if anyone's really this deep into it, but like, making like a computer god or something like that. There's lots of fantastic kind of descriptions about stuff like that. So quite a lot of them seem to be into that end of it. Also, many of them are on my end of it, where it's just like we're just kind of this is just another expression of like libertarianism, and there's tension there, which is I don't know that's been interesting to just work out is the tension between those two things.
Yeah, I've noticed that's something that makes the AI debates really hard to follow because people are very used to polar, you're this or you're that, you're Republican or you're Democrat, left, right, or whatever else. AI is really a two-axis disagreement. There's this concept of AGI, this artificial general intelligence, which will be like this god and that kind of thing. People who think that's going to happen and we're on track to that being fairly soon, so that we should be making decisions under that assumption. And some are like, that's kind of hype. Technology takes a long time to develop. You can underestimate how hard the problems are. We might get another AI winter. We've had them in the past. We should set our expectations a little less grandiose than that. But then there's the other axis, which is like totally separate from it, which is whether the unchecked advancing of technology is going to be good or bad. And you could be in any one of those four quadrants. Like you could say that AGI isn't going to happen, but we should still be scared because there's going to be all these externalized consequences, like social media being an example of that kind of thing, or certain takes on social media anyway. What I'm hearing from you there is that effective accelerationism is very explicitly the technology is good, but it's kind of ambiguous as to whether AGI is going to happen, but the dominant active members tend to be skewing towards it is, and you're maybe like a little less focused on AGI.
Yeah, I think that captures it pretty well. I don't know which way it skews more, but yeah, I see it the same way.
Well, there could also be a distinction between the active leading members versus the silent majority. I imagine people who see this as being the utopia or hell or whatever else, or might be a little louder than the people who are just like, oh, it's kind of more of the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've noticed something akin to what you're saying, which is like right now this is a really niche topic, and I think that attracts weird people just innately, whether no matter which side you're on it you
Sure.
are. So you get sort of weird or extreme comments just by the fact that those are the kind of people who would just end up in niche political subjects.
Would that be an accurate characterization of your view that AGI or superintelligence or that kind of thing isn't coming soon?
Yeah, that's how I feel. It could be wrong. I feel like technology, just as a general statement, I feel like technology takes a long time to develop. It takes a long time to get implemented and find its full productive use discovered. Like I feel like that way about the internet, 30 years or something of really just like public internet, and we're still finding new ways of using it. Saying all that, I don't really have a strong argument yet to present. That's my thought that things take a long time to develop.
Intuitively, do you see AGI as just being this thing that doesn't happen and isn't really coherent, or what's your mental sense of timeline, or is timeline just not really how you think about this?
I've been thinking about timelines quite a lot, especially trying to listen to people. If you realize what timeline people are talking about, that makes a big difference in what they're talking about. It's a good question about AGI. So my definition of AGI, when I just think about it, is just human-like intelligence. That's kind of a rough definition, but we all know what human-like intelligence is like because we interact with humans all the time. So I think of it as just making a machine that has the capabilities roughly of a human being. Can it reason? Can it do math? Does it have motivations? Does it have agency? Things like that. I think it's definitely possible because we already have one instance of it in the world, which is human beings. It seems like a matter of time before we can get machines to do that as well. I guess I'm optimistic that something like that will happen eventually, whether it be in the next 100 years or plus, before 100 years, after 100 years. I'm feeling like it would take longer. I think we're not close. When I think about the capabilities of AI we have today, they're very impressive, and in some ways they exceed human intelligence, but they're not close to something that can generally do things. And bringing lots of components together that could be a well-rounded intelligence that doesn't seem like we're close to yet. But I could be totally wrong about this too. So
What are some of the kind of things that you see that say like, oh yeah, this is a really big barrier. This is going to take a long time for AI to get over this. Because you'll see the OpenAI demos and like Sora realistic videos, and none of that was possible a year ago. From a certain perspective, is like, oh man, this is just like blowing up so much in the last year. That's an exponential. Every year is going to be even more mind blowing than that. If you have a more measured approach, what are the key data points you're looking at that makes that seem likely?
I'm using ChatGPT every day, both personally and at work. And I think of it like I'm just putting in text and we're getting like text out of it. Also, I see the latency times a lot. I think that's just relevant to our work. Is if you do a bunch of these calls to OpenAI, it just takes a long time because every single one takes half a second or something like that. I mentioned that to bring my unique perspective, which is that if you're going to have a machine that's doing a broad range of human-like intelligent things, I would think that a lot of it has to be somewhat instantaneous, much how human reasoning is. It seems fairly instantaneous. Like people can have conversations that they say things within a second, they get thoughts, in millisecond time. And just interacting with an AI to even get just like a text output, which is not demonstrating reasoning, it doesn't have memory or agency or interest or anything like that, takes so long. The times alone don't make it feel like a kind of centralized intelligence.
Yeah, there's two arguments I heard there. One I'm kind of skeptical on. The other one I want to hear more about. The one that seems a little strange to me is latency. Because if I ask ChatGPT to write an essay, yeah, there's latency. It's not instantaneous. But if I asked a person to write that same essay, it would take days. The other thing that you mentioned, though, which I find interesting, is that there's no reasoning there. Say a little bit more about that because it often gives very impressive answers that seem very creative and well reasoned. Not always. What do you kind of see from digging into this a little more on the technical side of it?
So first, I think that's a good point about the latency, which is that it can compared to a human writing an essay, it's like way better, right? Like it does it way faster. So like measuring the time of that, yeah, it's like exceeding human abilities. But I think that's a narrow ability. Producing language, getting the next token, giving it input. The latency to even do one sort of cycle of thought was what I meant. The latency in a human brain is much faster, but I don't know if that's a really significant point. I just wanted to clarify that. I'm sorry, I said so much there that I forgot what you're.
Sure. The other thing I'd asked about was you had mentioned that there's no reasoning. That's a little surprising, from a naive perspective of just like working with ChatGPT. It gives some really impressive answers. It seems like it kind of reasons and is creative sometimes. What are the kind of things that you look at it and say like, no, that might all be smoke and mirrors. There actually isn't really reasoning here.
I see what you're saying. We know it can do reasoning. If you type in a complicated situation, it'll give you a correct answer. That isn't just language. It has to understand the components of what you're saying and then come to a correct answer. So I guess LLMs seem to be doing some kind of reasoning to that extent. Although sometimes they get things wrong, and that it's funny. That's the thing people share around. There is sort of like a language outcome or byproduct. What I know about LLMs is that they predict the next token. I'm sure it's much more complicated than that, but they're doing plausible language. And I think what's interesting is when you really max out that ability, it seems to spill over into other abilities where by just looking at the context of language alone, it could come up with answers that seem to be reasoning. I guess that's how I would explain this apparent reasoning ability. And I don't mean to undermine it by saying it's not real reasoning. If we're getting the desired outcome, it does seem to be reasoning in some sense, but it's not fundamentally like a reasoning module. I guess that's what I'm thinking about.
The thing my mind goes to in assessing the intelligence of artificial intelligence is in terms of levels of abstraction and generality. So if I think just about the task of predicting the next token or the next word to be a slightly less accurate but more intuitive concept, you can imagine a machine that is a pure statistical inference kind of thing, just sees every word after every other word in every single case and says like, oh, when there's an and, then a the is the next most likely kind of thing. But that's too narrow. You'll get a lot of wrong answers. So if you have a little bit more context, that'll give you more. But you could imagine something that you build that way and it could work and you can get the same result, but you would need just massively more data to make that work for every possible combinations of words that's long enough to be able to predict the next word. Just the amount of computation that has to happen is of just this massive kind of lookup just gets ridiculous. And you can compress a lot of that down if there's some kind of knowledge of syntax, like of how language works and just grammatical structure and so on. That can do a lot of work and in a relatively smaller space. And then you can get even more, at least in terms of quality, if you also have some understanding of semantics, like what words mean and so on. You'll get higher quality with a lot less computation, a lot less data required. So then the question is like how many levels of abstraction are in there because it's hard to see inside all those neurons where the abstraction's happening. And then also how much abstraction is needed to get to a human level. I guess the analogy I like giving is with chess. An AI that's the best in the world, but just has a giant lookup table is less impressive than one that's pretty good, but just figures it all out. Because it's that generality that really matters. And that's a hard thing to measure. Like, what's a test for generality? Like, skill on a particular thing is like, oh, does it hit this benchmark or does it not? The thing that's missing from measuring the intelligence of AI is that intuitively people seem to have this idea of this is the thing that's emblematic of intelligence. It used to be chess and then it was Go and now it's language or whatever else. And oh, it does that. Now it's intelligent. But if someone had a different benchmark, then they're not impressed. And so it's like some people, the trend line is straight up, and some people it's a total flat line. And like that's a hard thing to agree on. A trend isn't useful unless it's linear, because then you can extrapolate and predict. If it's just a sudden thing, what can you do with that? Where I would see that linear trend line is from levels of abstraction and generality. Where exactly ChatGPT is on that scale, a little harder to say.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think I see what you're saying. Some people are saying nothing's happening. Some people are saying everything's happening, and then yeah, it's hard to see which one of those things are. I've heard some people point out that like maybe the standard of AGI is sort of changing, or not just different, but shifting. We never consider what we have AGI. The AGI is the next thing, and
Sure.
that'll be really scary. But then I don't know if that's status, is that comforting or not? Because then maybe the danger's already here in some sense.
If you look at the word general, that's obviously a scalar term. Something must be more or less general. It's not something that's like an on-off switch. But thinking tends to be Booleans. And so like, have we achieved it or not is like a very natural question to ask and thing to say. But even just like looking at the language of it, like that doesn't, it's kind of incoherent. I would be of the opinion that yes, we have AGI now, but it's very weak. And over time, it'll be stronger. And at some point, it reaches a threshold that makes a really big difference. That's really more of an economics and psychology question than it is technology, really.
I think like the definition of intelligence is just like raw ability. But it's interesting when we talk about AGI, it seems like what spooks people is thinking about it having agency and intentions, which is not really an ability. I wonder if that should be or should not be a part of the definition. If it's just an ability, I think of computers as already like super able. 40 years ago, they could do math better than, anybody. But most people wouldn't think that computers are more intelligent than them. It seems like they focus on this thing that's not really about ability. I don't know. Like,
At this point, it'd be a good time to shift gears here, because the conversation about how intelligent AI really is a really interesting one and informs a lot of things. But it's actually not the point that's the most contentious disagreement. It's really more about whether this is good or not. Before getting into the cruxes on that, I want to understand where EX position is. If I were to just look at Twitter, the impression that I got was that they believe that AI or AGI will cause human extinction, and that's a good thing because computers will be better than us. And that's like, oh yeah, that's like that doesn't sound very pleasant. Is that an accurate view of what they're about?
I don't know. Yeah, so I haven't seen anyone say anything so direct as I guess I should in a chat room or something, speaking to people directly. I haven't seen anybody say something like this would be human extinction, and I think it would be good.
I've seen
Um,
Richard Sutton say that on Twitter.
I see.
But I guess what I'm getting at is that a weird extreme, or is it representative?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. It could just be because I've seen screenshots of people saying that as well. Like I think there's a fellow named Beth Jezos who said things to this extent, and then it also I've noticed like people in at least the one Discord server I'm in, they seem to like that like Beth. So I don't know if transitively they actually also think that. Could just maybe it's just a thing that they just don't focus on. But if you push them or if you think about what they claim, that would just be a logical implication of that. I'm not sure, but there's some excitement that like, if there could be a computer that's like that's more powerful, smarter, yeah, has agency, all this stuff. It'll be so powerful, and it would just like it would be the next evolution. And so then there's a question about like what would happen to humanity. It does seem like there's like admiration for that next step, and maybe that would come at the price of humanity. I've wondered on this topic specifically, like if there was a computer that took over the whole world, I don't know if it just dominated in some sense. Could you have empathy for it and like think of it as like an ancestor or something like that? People have different feelings about that. I think the human extinction is a bad thing. Maybe I should put
Sure.
that's my flag.
I was
Human
gonna
extinction
I
is
was
a bad
gonna
thing.
ask about that, but yeah, thanks for clarifying.
Yeah, yeah. But yes, I wonder if that's like a dividing thing, is how much people would identify with the AI that would take over the world.
Okay, so for you personally, human extinction is bad. For effective accelerationists generally, they don't seem to be saying that explicitly, but it sounds like it might be implied based on other things that they're saying.
For the more libertarian side of it, like myself, and we just don't think like AGI is going to just explode. So it's just sort of not a question for us.
There's a little bit of jargon from Less Wrong where a lot of these conversations initially happen called the FOOM theory or hard takeoff or fast takeoff. It has a lot of different names. The way I would summarize that is if you think of AI as automating tasks and enough collection of tasks is a job, enough collection of jobs is an industry, well, AI itself is an industry, which is a collection of jobs of tasks. And so if all of those get automated, then you can have a system that's able to just improve itself. And we expect this will happen because humans are improving AI. And so those are abilities that could be done by a machine. So yeah, once it gets to that point, we have an AI just kind of improving itself. Once you have that exponential or training itself, then you have this really fast takeoff. And the reason that matters, which is a thing that gets lost in that discussion a bunch, is that if you're relying on iteration to keep things safe, like how things often work is you make something, it breaks, you figure out what went wrong, and then you fix it. If the takeoff is so fast that you can't iterate anymore, then you can't rely on that really fundamental tool. What's your reason for disagreeing with that kind of logic?
It sounds fanciful that anything that could just blow up that fast. Just because something has never happened doesn't mean it won't ever happen. Something never happens until it happens at least once. But then I need a reason for thinking, why is this extremely unique event going to happen where there's a singular, just an explosion of technology in this super advanced entity that emerged very quickly in the world? And when I think through the reason, I'm not sold. I don't know if that's a complete or satisfying answer, but I guess that's where I'm at.
What you're basically speaking to in rationalist jargon is priors. The idea of like, okay, I have this model of how the world works, and you say something that goes against that model, I need to update. And so that means I need a lot of evidence to make that change. That's reasonable. It's a starting point. It's not a proof, but it's a this is where I start, convince me. And I think that's totally valid. For just a conversation, the way I would respond to that is to talk about priors. Is that a reasonable starting place? This FOOM idea is this thing that's never happened before, and now it's this totally new thing. Why would you expect a sudden change? I guess my skepticism of that, or why I would think that it is reasonable, is that, well, actually, it's very well precedented. Like, if you look at the millions of years of human history, the last several 10,000 years was just a radical hockey stick kind of change. And even the last several decades has been another exponential comparison to that, talking about the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution and then the digital revolution after that. We're on an exponential now. What's so strange about expecting that exponential to continue exponentialing?
Yeah, yeah, great point. I totally concede what you're saying that, especially on like historical time scales, there have been major changes, just abrupt changes in human history. And it does seem like things are accelerating. There's a fellow I quite admire, Robin Hanson, I think, who pointed out that the time between the agricultural revolution and the industrial revolution is way longer than like the industrial revolution and maybe like, I don't know, the information age that we're in now. I'll concede that. But I think even if things are accelerating, we plot it out, is it going to really accelerate to like things change overnight? I think that'd be my first response. Is it going to accelerate that much? And then my second one is, what specific things are we going to analogize about the previous acceleration of human history with sort of a FOOM-like situation? Because all of these revolutions that we're seeing historically, like in our short evolutionary history, they all still have humans in them. For example, there's still constant features of humans throughout all that, even if there's lots of cultural and biological evolution going on in the meantime.
Yeah, so the thing I would be analogizing to would be the transition from human knowledge development being based on evolution to being based on culture. Some animals can use tools, for example, but all of that is something that they've gained the ability through some evolutionary adaptation. But then once humans had the ability to pass on culture and accumulate on that, now we're no longer reliant on people dying off in generations and some propagating and spreading. You can just have an idea, go person to person, and just go on that time scale. Well, okay. One thing I'm going to concede. Part of the FOOM hypothesis was back in the days before deep learning was dominant. And people implicitly expected that AI would be code that people wrote, and then AI would help write the code, and then it would get better at writing its own code. And like, okay, you can kind of imagine how that improves itself and gets faster and faster, and you take humans out of the loop. Now that it's like training it, and you don't really self-improve, you maybe make a better algorithm and then start over and make a new AI. That's a little awkward through that FOOM lens. Even so, I think the idea is not necessarily dead. I'm thinking about things like chain of thought or groups of agents communicating with each other. Perhaps if it gets to a point where rather than having to create a new training run, things can generate new capabilities by just talking to itself or other instances, then it loses that barrier. And that's something that could happen at a critical threshold.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there would be some. I mean, I could see like the way that we would get like that could be a differentiating factor between all of I guess like the advancement of our society up until now is that there's a revolution in intelligence or self-improvement, and then that would be another acceleration in the development, like you're saying.
I think I want to shift the subject again because the hard takeoff is actually not really like it's relevant, but it's not the core part in terms of whether we have a pessimistic or an optimistic outlook of how AI goes. There's a big question as to whether one expects AI to be good for people by default, or whether that's something that takes really careful engineering to get right.
I guess that is my prior, that technology is good and freedom is are good things that help humanity. But then remember, my position is we don't have AGI, we just have a really cool, useful technology. That seems empirically plausible that, you develop a technology that just wipes out everything, but I just don't see this technology as close to that. I have priors or assumptions that letting people work with this technology or just technology generally will let them come up with something good that helps people.
The thing that would be in opposition to the view that you described is what I see Gary Marcus, for example, tweeting of even if it doesn't become this world conquering sort of thing, it's still super dangerous to have this thing that people can use it to make weapons and have deep fakes that mess up the elections, and nothing on the internet is reliable anymore. There's all these externalized costs that companies don't care about that. They're just going to go after the profit and they're going to push all these damages onto society. And that's really bad. Need to rein the tech companies in.
Those seem like real concerns as well. The bad outcome of AI doesn't have to be human extinction. It could be all kinds of bad things. It's perfectly safe, but it helps people make weapons or something, or it destroys the wonders of the internet. We can't really communicate because we can't trust anything on it anymore. So yeah, I see what you mean. Those are real independent questions as well. Any technology I would expect to be disruptive, any really big technology. So I want to recognize that there's winners and losers in anything like that. There are bad things, I'm sure, but I think on net, that's the point that I'm really focused on. So I think on net, I think things are for the better. I'm sure there are losers of the internet too, but most people wouldn't think of the internet as a mistake or wasn't worth it.
I'm wondering that something like the internet was released on people very slowly, and a lot of the dangers of it were mitigated by people seeing things happen and then working against it. I'm imagining if you were to drop the internet of today without any defense mechanisms, without any antivirus, without any knowledge of phishing scams or social media addiction or any of that kind of thing, right back in the 90s, that might have been a lot more scarily disruptive. What I'm getting at is that the pace of innovation seems to matter.
It's an interesting point because when I think of like the slowdown, it's mostly just because people have not gotten used to it. This hypothetical internet out today just dropped on people in the 90s. Like, would people even log in? Would they even know that's a thing to do? Would they even have the dopamine addiction to log into AOL or whatever would be available to them? When I think of the slowdown, I think of it as just an inherent part of consumers just adopting things or businesses just adopting things.
So there's going to be some kind of breaks just inherent in something like AI. Actually, and this kind of relates to the work that you're doing. OpenAI pushes some foundation model. That's just going to be a curiosity until people actually do the hard work of making products that are actually useful, finding customers, communicating the value to customers, customers learning how to actually use that stuff, telling their friends about it, all these things that are based on human timescales that take time to disseminate.
Yeah, I think so. You captured what I was trying to say pretty well. Maybe there's one thing I could add on to that too, is I think so assume that we should pause AI. Like it's dangerous. We should go slow. We should think about it. We should make sure that it's safe. There's another question. Which sort of entity in the world should be the one doing the pausing or the one doing the safety concern? And that could be the government, which is what a lot of people think. But I also think that the corporations, like the companies themselves, they could also handle safety as well. They might have their own concerns. They probably don't want to wipe out humanity at the very least for profit incentive, right? Like there's no one to sell to, no one alive. And it seems like a lot of people complain about, especially like in EA areas, like they've complained about the censorship of these LLMs. Like you can't get them to say certain things. And I think there's a really bad history of uncensored AI. It makes sense why the companies would not want to have an uncensored one because they don't want the project to just crash and burn immediately. I connected that to our previous thought too, because it seems like the companies themselves might not want to be too disruptive. They might want to slow down the pace of their rollout just innately because they don't want to do something that looks really ugly really quickly. They want to have a good track record, a good reputation for the long haul. They're going to have some product that's going to be around for 100 years.
So the core idea I'm hearing and all of that is like, okay, yeah, it's fine to have an intellectual, like philosophical debate about whether we're better off going fast or slow or whatever else. But we're on this fast track right now, and if we're going to change that, that means changing it by some mechanism, whether that's a government regulation or whatever else. And those mechanisms that we would use, that has to happen, that needs has consequences, and that needs to be balanced against whatever you think the impact of the trajectory we're on is.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, if you thought companies were not going to do a sufficiently good job being safe, and the government would be do a sufficiently good job of regulating safety, I can see why you pick the government. I guess I'm kind of curious about like making the observations of what do these companies do. I've at least observed companies to some extent being slower, not 100% unleashing, because they don't want to get a bad reputation through a lot of ugly disruptions. So I guess that's like the framework. I don't know if that's pro or anti-regulation or pro or anti. I'm a libertarian. I'm always thinking about what companies can do, but that's like a framework of thinking about this.
I see on the time that's towards the end of what you had available, so I want to respect that. Thanks very much for your time and enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Will, for reaching out to me. I hope you have a good one.
You as well.